It was shortly before 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning, after a long night of broadcasting, that Andrew Neil told viewers what few would have thought possible a year ago.
And Donald Trump comes on stage as the American media report that Hillary Clinton has called to concede the presidential election of 2016. Most of the major American networks and news outlets now reporting that he is the 45th president of the United States.
We're going to be doing a job that hopefully you'll be so proud of your president. You'll be so proud. Again, it's my honor. It was an amazing evening. It's been an amazing 2-year period. And I love this country. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This culmination of a long and stormy campaign left journalists with a lot of stock-taking and soul-searching. There have been allegations that the media failed to challenge and scrutinise some of the claims made by the two main candidates, and the charges we've discussed on this programme before, that BBC News initially treated Donald Trump as something of a joke figure, and that more recently an institutional liberal bias was shown against him.
Calling Florida for Donald Trump.
Some felt that prejudice was on show during Tuesday night's election special.
But
Florida,
it's not looking good.
No one can say it isn't going that way.
And in the programming since, with dozens of complaints a day in recent weeks.
And Stephanie asks, could a world war be looming in the future because of this result?
Paul Carter put it like this: BBC reporters showed disappointment and a depressed manner at Trump's victory. And D&C Wood thought the letters BBC now stood for something else. Despite the brazenly biased coverage, the target of unfettered disdain and animosity, Donald Trump has won. This is a massive humiliation for the media as a whole and for Britain's brainwashing corporation in particular. Well, the BBC's controller of daily news programmes, Gavin Allen, is going to be with me throughout the programme. Let's start with the question of whether there's an instinctive liberal bias in the campaign coverage, which some people felt there was, and which contributed, arguably, to the BBC not taking Mr Trump seriously enough as a credible candidate early enough.
I think it'd be interesting, actually, had Donald Trump not won, I suspect we'd probably been criticised for taking him too seriously, for doing too much coverage on Donald Trump. The bottom line with this is, realistically, it was a two-horse race. There were other candidates, but it was a two-horse race. One of those horses was always going to win, and it was our job to make sure that people going into this election understood what each candidate stood for and who they were, and I think we did that fairly.
The campaign was dominated by abuse and rhetoric. It was really striking, the tone of the campaign. Now people are asking what on earth a Trump presidency means, and he wasn't very forthcoming on his policies. But again, people are saying, should the BBC have done much more to press him on that point, or at least to point up the lack of precise policies?
I think we did look at policies as and when they arose, as and when we could glean them. Obviously, we didn't have much access to Donald Trump himself or Hillary Clinton herself. We looked at race issues, we looked at immigration issues, we looked at trade, we looked at a whole range of things across Newsnight, Hard Talk and a lot of our bulletin programmes. But it's clear also that come the result, there's a renewed interest in what does this actually mean now, what will actually be carried forward. So that will start afresh.
Gavin, thank you. Stay with us and we'll move on to the next issue to cover. So if some people feel the BBC was hoping for a Hillary Clinton victory, then it seems pretty clear that the organisation, along with the vast majority of the mainstream media internationally, was certainly expecting it. Deep into Tuesday night's election special, Emily Maitlis acknowledged that the predictions of a few hours before were proving less than reliable.
What have we learnt tonight? That it might be time to throw professional political polling out the window for a while and go back to Paul the Octopus and his 8 tentacles. It seems as good a chance as any of getting things right.
Is he here?
We're getting him. We fast-styled him. We're going to call him up.
For those of you who can't recall, Paul the Octopus was, of course, using his psychic powers to predict the results of football matches in Germany, proving especially successful in the 2010 World Cup. So, should Donald Trump's victory have come as such a surprise? John Home was unimpressed, writing, "Well, the BBC got it wrong again. I hope you will now realise the world has changed. Wake up, the whole political situation is different." And Marion Hebblethwaite wondered, why does the BBC continue to tell us what will be said or happen? It makes you look out of touch and part of the intellectual elite who somehow know what will happen. Then, of course, you don't. Well, Gavin Allen is still with us. A sense of amazement is what I think some of the viewers were detecting among some of the journalists they saw, suggesting that the results were really a shock, and perhaps it's the methodology, the reliance on experts on bothering to use polling when, you know, it seems quite disconnected from the reality.
It's really interesting there's this impression, I think, that's grown that the BBC relies on polling, is constantly talking about polling agencies and using it in our bulletins. We don't do that. We absolutely scrupulously did not do that for this, nor in fact for the Brexit referendum. We do talk to experts, of course we talk to experts, and I think it's totally legitimate. There are questions now about political strategists, certainly about pollsters, and about over-reliance on anything other than voters and speaking to them and understanding their concerns.
But see all those graphics, you had Jeremy Vine for how many hours in that studio? You're using all that data, even if someone else has produced it. People are questioning, really, what's the point when it's so unreliable?
Well, no, I disagree with that. I think it's perfectly fair that Jeremy is trying to explain the demographics in America. The fact that in the run-up to this election, it was easier, inverted commas, for Hillary Clinton to get the presidency because of the nature of the way the electoral polling worked, electoral system worked, than it was for Donald Trump. But at no point were we saying, and therefore Hillary Clinton is a shoo-in for the presidency, or Donald Trump is a shoo-in for the presidency. That wasn't the case.
But isn't there a case saying there should be less of that kind of graphicry, and certainly maybe a reduction in the volume of it that appears on air, if you're going to exclude the polls?
Except in fairness, what they were doing, what Emily was doing and what Jeremy Vine was doing with the graphics was trying to show from the exit polls who was ahead, in terms of who has actually voted, what's happening. Actually, it was showing Donald Trump ahead, but also trying to explain the system. It is quite a complex system in terms of the state system, as well as overall votes. And I think it's important you carry the audience with you when you're trying to show them quite important results, which I think we did.
OK, Gavin, thanks. Let's move on to the next issue. Those who hadn't been following events from America throughout Tuesday night did not miss out when they woke up on Wednesday. The BBC's election special was already being shown, not just on the news channel, but also on BBC One, where it displaced breakfast, and BBC One continued to simulcast what one viewer called a Trumpathon for most of the day, meaning all 10 scheduled programmes up until 5:15 p.m. were moved or dropped. Linda Kemp couldn't understand this lack of choice.
Believe me, I do understand how important this vote is in America, but I'm pretty disgusted that we've got it exactly the same on One and the news channel. On One, we haven't got any breakfast television, no local news, no weather, absolutely nothing. I think this is saturation.
At around the same time that Donald Trump's victory was becoming apparent, news broke of the fatal tram derailment in Croydon in London, although more information emerged during the day, including the fact that 7 people had died with more than 50 injured. Not much of that made it on air for a long time, and that annoyed hundreds of viewers, including this caller.
I'm absolutely furious. There's been a tragic accident in Croydon and 7 people have lost their lives, and all you can talk about on the news is Donald Trump and America. I'm not interested in that anymore. We've had it all night and all blooming day. You know, that we've got news here. Please.
Well, Gavin Allen is here to answer that issue too. Hundreds of viewers felt they found it bizarre. Why does it have to take up 2 channels when you've got a news channel? And crucially, it was a really serious incident in Croydon that really wasn't given the attention it should have been, that was even quite disrespectful.
I think it was notable that on the main bulletins on that Wednesday, on the 1 o'clock news, on the 6 o'clock news, on the 10 o'clock news, there was only one story from memory on those programmes that wasn't the American elections, and that was the Croydon tram tragedy. We headlined that story, we covered that story, BBC London News was live from the scene. Now clearly I'm not suggesting that there wasn't a displacement of some news as a result of the Trump presidency, but we did cover the tram story as well, and we'll continue to do so, because I agree it's a hugely important story.
What about the simulcasting? What was the point of having exactly the same output on the news channel and BBC One? There wasn't any need.
I think traditionally, whether it's breakfast, the 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock news, we do have simulcasting on the channel and BBC
All
One.
day.
No, but in this case, where there's something of really huge international news significance, I think it is understandable that we as a news organisation want that to go to the most wide audience, the biggest audience possible. Clearly that means BBC One, but it's also understandable why BBC One itself wants to take that news coverage to bring it to its audience.
I still think people would say they have the same access to both channels. Why not give them a choice? You could have perhaps given more domestic coverage if you'd given the news channel a mixed agenda and had your election special on BBC One or vice versa. I
suppose the proof of that is in the audience figures that we get and the fact that millions of people are tuning in.
Well, they didn't have any choice, to be fair.
But also, you can tune out, you can go elsewhere. They didn't. There was no sign they did that. But it was also important that news was still happening as this was going on. This wasn't Trump gets elected, nothing moves. There was economic news and responses. There was the Hillary Clinton statements. There was a lot still to cover for a hugely interested audience.
Gavin, thank you very much for coming on Newswatch.